The only time I heard my brother's voice after we buried our mother was through the hiss of a late-night radio dedication. "This one's for Clara, wherever she is. Happy birthday, sis." I used to think memories couldn't bruise, but that sentence proved me wrong every single year. I'm Clara, 32 now, though the story begins a decade earlier, before birthdays tasted like rust. We grew up in a clapboard house outside Asheville, where the mountains wore morning fog like a shawl and our father's laughter filled the kitchen above the smell of cinnamon bread. There were 4 of us: Dad, Mom, my older brother Jonah, and me. Jonah was 2 years older. Taller, louder, the kind of boy who could charm cranky neighbors into lending him their bicycles. He taught me how to skip stones and how to cheat at Monopoly without getting caught. I taught him how to listen for whippoorwills at dusk. If you'd peeked through our windows back then you'd have seen something dangerously close to perfect. Sunday hikes, cassette mixtapes labeled road trip anthems, and long summer evenings when Jonah and I raced fireflies against the porch light. Our parents fought sometimes. Money mostly, but they fought soft with closed doors and whispered apologies. I mistook that hush for safety. The balance tilted the year Jonah turned 20 and I 18. He left for college on an arts scholarship, a first-generation miracle. I stayed behind to help Mom through a rough patch of chemo, her second harsher battle. Dad picked up night shifts at the paper mill. Jonah called from campus with stories of student radio gigs and stolen cafeteria ice cream. I envied him, but in the small, ordinary way sisters envy brothers who get to taste the world first. Mom died in early spring before the dogwoods bloomed. At the funeral I clung to Jonah's coat sleeve like a branch in floodwater. He whispered, "I won't leave you." For a heartbeat I believed him. But promises, like arteries, can tear where we can't see. Before the flowers on Mom's grave had even wilted, a rumor, no, a blade, slipped between us. I won't say the words yet. Just know it shattered more than silence. By my next birthday Jonah wasn't at my side. He was on the college radio at 2:07 a.m., dedicating a song to a sister who refused to speak. And somewhere inside that song, the perfect picture of our family cracked, the shards already glinting in the dark. Grief is loud in the first weeks, all casseroles and condolences, but then it thins out, until only the wrong kinds of silence remain. That's when Jonah swung the axe. It started with a shoebox Mom kept beneath her bed, the one she'd labeled "spring cleaning, don't toss." Inside were her chemo journals, a silver rosary and an envelope of cash, $12,000 in neat bank sleeves. Dad hadn't known about the money, neither had I. Jonah claimed he found the box while helping clear Mom's room. "She was saving this for you, Clara," he said, pressing the envelope into my hands. "College, new start, whatever." His voice shook with something I misread as kindness. 3 days later the envelope vanished. I woke to Sheriff Valdez and 2 deputies standing in our kitchen, their radios crackling like angry insects. The accusation was simple, delivered in a tone that assumed guilt. "Your brother says you stole your mother's funeral savings." They found the emptied bank sleeves in my dresser, tucked beneath folded jeans. Jonah stood behind them, face white, eyes shimmering. "I'm sorry, Clara. I had to tell them," he whispered, like betraying me was an act of mercy. I stammered every truth I knew. I never touched that money, never even counted it. But my fingerprints were on the envelopes. Gifted to me, remember? Jonah shrugged when I pointed that out, as if reality itself had slipped a knee and fallen. Dad, hollow-eyed from night shifts and grief, didn't shout. He just asked the deputies whether charges were necessary. They said no for now. But word spreads like fungi in small towns. By evening, Mrs. Keene at the coffee shop called to reconsider my position. The church group that once prayed over Mom's chemo cords now huddled and whispered when I walked by. Someone scrawled "thief" in chalk across our driveway. Dad began locking the liquor cabinet, though I'd never taken a sip in my life. I tried to confront Jonah. He avoided me by broadcasting his student radio show from campus, 2 counties away. On air he spun sentimental ballads between anecdotes about people you thought you knew. Our neighbors listened. By my birthday that year the station's late-night host let Jonah dedicate a track to my lost little sister, "Hope You Find Your Way Back." I yanked the radio plug from the wall and screamed into the static. But silence is poor insulation against betrayal. Could I defend myself? I begged the bank for footage. Cameras had been down for maintenance. Sheriff Valdez suggested a polygraph, then sighed when I agreed, like compliance itself was suspicious. Dad asked if I needed help, the coded language our town used for rehab. I realized they weren't looking for truth. They were looking for closure, and Jonah's story fit the lock. The night the deputies left, I sifted through Mom's journals, desperate for proof. On one page she'd scrawled, 12,000 feels heavy but Clara deserves light. I clutched that sentence like a life raft until I noticed the smeared ink. Someone had wet the page and the date was unreadable. I couldn't even prove the note hadn't been forged. Shock calcified into disbelief, disbelief into raw loss. I moved out 2 weeks later, taking only a suitcase and Mom's rosary. I left the radio behind, but still, every year on the hour of my birth, Jonah's voice crackled through some stranger's kitchen, singing me a guilt-tipped lullaby I refused to answer. I thought leaving town would amputate the pain, but wounds travel with you. The body just rearranges them. Asheville disappeared in the rearview mirror of a greyhound headed east, yet Jonah's accusation rode beside me, whispering like steam against the window. Maybe you did take it. Maybe grief made you greedy. I landed in Raleigh with $200, a cracked phone, and Mom's rosary coiled like a secret in my coat pocket. For 6 months I slept on couches found through classifieds, trading childcare, dishwashing, anything for a night under someone else's ceiling. The first family was kind until their toddler parroted playground gossip. That girl's a thief. Picked up from a parent who'd recognized my last name. I left before sunrise, ashamed of how easily a rumor could evict me. Jobs dissolved faster than friendships. Coffee shops Googled applicants. Nursing homes ran background checks. Restaurants trusted whispers more than resumes. Each rejection letter felt heavier than the last until my shoulders curved inward, as if folding around an invisible indictment. Winter arrived early that year, sharp as comment section cruelty. When the last couch offer dried up, I drifted into the shelter system. The cots smelled of bleach and exhausted prayers. Beside me, a woman recited psalms through cracked lips. Across the aisle, a veteran screamed himself awake each dawn. Their griefs were loud. Mine stayed silent, using the rosary beads as worry stones until the crucifix wore smooth. Am I crazy? I asked the ceiling every night. Did I misplace the envelope? Sleepwalk? Steal from myself? Jonah's story had become so ubiquitous that doubt crawled into my blood. Memories warped. Had his hands shaken when he gave me the money, or was that my invention? I lined up the evidence like dominoes, but they never formed a straight path. Desperation makes bargains with pride. I called Dad once from a payphone outside a laundromat that accepted quarters and regrets. He answered with weary caution, as though expecting a ransom demand. I told him I wanted to come home to explain again. He said he'd replaced my bedroom door with shelving, storage for boxes of unsold realtor brochures. I don't have the space, Clara, he sighed, meaning for me, not for furniture. We ran out of words before the phone ran out of minutes. The night I nearly stepped off the Walnut Creek pedestrian bridge was less dramatic than I once imagined rock bottom would be. No storm, no cinematic rain, just the hum of traffic below and the taste of iron in the air. I wasn't planning an exit so much as craving quiet, a hush wide enough to drown the static of that yearly radio dedication. But a gust of cold wind slapped me back, silly and mundane, reminding me I was still hungry, still alive, still insufficiently convinced. After that I stopped flirting with freeway shoulders and started living on bus routes, warm, constant loops that cost less than a motel. Drivers learned my name. One slid a granola bar across the yellow line each morning. Kindness feels radioactive at your lowest. I rationed it, ashamed to take too much. Somewhere in that endless circuit of city blocks, I realized no one was coming to clear my name. Truth, I began to see, doesn't rescue, it waits. If I wanted it to matter, I'd have to crawl toward it myself, even if my knees bled on asphalt. I was down to my last $5 and 2 leaps of faith when a stranger stepped onto the bus, glanced at my notebook full of frantic job leads and asked, "You any good with words?" He wore a courier jacket and carried a stack of battered manuscripts. I didn't know it then, but the question would pivot everything. The first loose thread in the knot I'd been strangling in. I clutched Mom's rosary, felt a bead crack and muttered, "I can try." I didn't yet know his name, or that he'd become the unlikely ally who'd drag me from the wreckage. But as the bus doors hissed shut, I felt, for the first time in 2 years, something akin to forward motion that wasn't escape. The courier's name was Emmett Wolfe, and he spoke like someone forever out of breath, but always in on the joke. When the bus jolted forward, The manuscripts in his arms slid to the floor in a defeated fan. I helped gather them, noticing margin notes in 3 colors. Crimson for cuts, teal for questions, gold for praise. I'm an editorial mule, he laughed. I haul other people's almost dreams. When he asked if I was good with words, I told him I'd once planned on studying linguistics before grief rerouted me through purgatory. He nodded as though that made perfect sense, then said the press he freelanced for, Larkspur House Publishing, 2 rooms above a pawn shop, needed a last-minute copy editor who could survive on instant noodles and stubborn hope. Payment's a pittance, he warned, but pittance beats nothing. I followed him off at the next stop, stomach twisting between hunger and the terror of believing in something again. Larkspur House smelled of old paper and burnt coffee. Its founder, Marion, wore round spectacles that magnified her surprise when Emmett barged in with a ragged stranger. She slid her gaze to the rosary at my throat, as though measuring the weight of ghosts I carried, then pointed me to a desk wedged between filing cabinets. Fix the commas in that memoir, she said. If I cry less by page 50, you're hired. I buried myself in clauses and semicolons, trading intrusive memories for dangling modifiers. Nights, Emmett let me crash on a futon in his apartment, a loft over an abandoned bakery that still smelled faintly of sugar. Rent was a half share of utilities and a promise I wouldn't vanish without warning. I paid with tips from proofreading and by cooking dinners that tried to taste like home. Trust was a fragile truce. I slept with my suitcase zipped and Jonah's lies coiled tight in my gut. But Emmett never pried. He left mugs of chamomile by the futon, slid post-jokes under the bathroom door, and, on evenings when my hands shook too hard to type, he wordlessly closed my laptop and coaxed me onto the roof to watch planes stitch silver threads through the dusk. One manuscript changed everything. It was a thin volume of essays about sibling devotion, chapters filled with late-night phone calls and birthday rituals that resembled Jonah's radio dedications too closely. Halfway through, my vision blurred. Grief erupted without warning. I slammed the file shut and retreated to the fire escape, sobs ricocheting off brick. Emmett followed but kept a respectful distance, offering the silence most people fill with questions. When I finally spoke, the confession came out jagged. The missing envelope, the deputy's Jonah's annual broadcast that branded me a criminal in absentia. Emmett listened, fingers laced around a chipped coffee mug, like holding onto warmth might keep the story from freezing him. You need evidence, he said when I finished. And witnesses who aren't already convinced of a narrative. It sounded absurd. Truth had never been enough, but he'd planted a seed of outrage stronger than my shame. Emmett introduced me to Viola Chin, a lawyer-turned-literary agent who owed him favors the way sailors owe the tide. Viola wasn't gentle. She called Jonah's story Swiss cheese, and scheduled a consultation with a forensic accountant before I could protest. They traced the bank withdrawal to an ATM on Jonah's campus, time-stamped hours after I'd been photographed volunteering at Mom's hospice wing. A small crack in his version of events, but a crack wide enough for daylight. The discoveries didn't return the money, but they returned something rarer: agency. Viola guided me through filing a formal statement. Emmett sat beside me during interviews, his knee a steady metronome in a room full of fluorescent anxiety. Therapy followed, court-ordered for paperwork reasons, but quickly sacred for survival. My therapist, Dr. Hazelwood, likened trauma to a radio left on static. You can't turn it off, Clara, but you can change the station. Months passed. I moved from Emmett's futon to a rented studio with peeling paint and glorious solitude. Larkspur House promoted me to developmental editor. Marion toasted with bargain champagne and declared my commas weapons of mass clarification. I bought a second-hand radio, placed it on the shelf, and each birthday at 2:07 a.m. I turned the volume to 0. Not ready to listen but ready to decide if I ever would. For the first time since Mom's funeral, the future didn't feel like a courtroom I'd already lost. Felt, unfathomably, like mine. 5 years slipped by like pages in a dog-eared paperback. Creased, reread, but no longer fragile. I framed my first royalty check from Larkspur House, not for the amount, which barely covered rent, but for the proof of reinvention. I traded the studio's peeling walls for a sunlit apartment above a florist, where Saturday mornings smelled of damp petals and possibility. Emmett's visits became sleepovers. Sleepovers became toothbrushes side by side, Until one evening he wordlessly slid a spare key across the table with a grin that asked no questions and held all the answers. I rebuilt myself with small, deliberate acts, joining a book club that met in parks, baking cinnamon bread because nostalgia needn't stay a weapon, planting herbs in chipped teacups on the fire escape. Therapy sessions tapered from weekly to monthly, each one a layer of varnish over splintered wood. I still winced at the word family, but the reflex felt duller, like a scar no longer tender. My birthday arrived each February, and at 2:07 a.m. I sat before the muted radio, fingertips resting on the volume knob, pulse steady. The first year in the new apartment I left it silent. The second I twisted the dial a brutal inch, heard faint pop static, then retreated. The third year I let the broadcast spill into the dark. "Clara," Jonah's voice cracked, older now yet unmistakably his. "I know you won't pick up. I'm still hoping you hear me. Happy birthday." No mention of theft, no apology, just the looping ache of what once was. I turned the radio off but didn't smash it. Progress. Late spring of the 5th year, Viola called. "Brace yourself," she said, her tone equal parts lawyer and older sister. "Jonah's about to discover how small a world this is." She'd stumbled across an investigative podcast piecing together stories of financial abuse. One episode teased an upcoming segment, the sibling heist when loyalty goes on trial. They were interviewing Jonah, who, faced with criminal scrutiny after new evidence, had pivoted public, claiming the theft was a desperate misunderstanding, that he'd tried to protect me from my own spending habits. A fresh lie on top of the fossilized one, but now recorded, downloadable, shareable. 2 nights before the episode aired, my phone rang at 2:07 a.m., the caller ID blocked. I answered, heart twitching. Jonah exhaled on the line, sound frayed like torn tape. "Jonah, Clara, please. The producers want your side. They're tearing me apart. Dad's lost the house, the legal fees are killing him. I messed up, okay? But you can fix this." Me, fix? Or absolve? The silence that followed was thick with every unanswered birthday. When he finally spoke, his words cascaded like pennies in a prayer fountain. Sorry, clanging but never quite filling the well. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Larkspur House. Registered mail, Jonah's handwriting shaking across the envelope. Inside, photocopies of the ATM footage Viola's accountant had uncovered. A notarized confession stating he withdrew the cash for tuition, but panicked when Mom died and framed me to avoid Dad's rage. He ended with a plea. "I broke us. I can't unbreak it alone." That night Emmett found me on the roof, clutching the papers as the city hummed below. "You don't owe him anything," he said, but his eyes asked what I wanted, not what I deserved. I remembered Dr. Hazelwood's metaphor, changing the station. Some frequencies, once clear, warp with distance. Others bleed into new songs. I agreed to meet Jonah at a neutral place. A public library in Asheville where the hush felt almost religious. Dad came too, shoulders collapsed inward as if decades of mill dust had finally settled in his bones. Jonah's face was gaunt, his once charming grin replaced by a tremor. The confession lay between us on a wooden table. No grand speeches. I told him the document would go to the DA, that restitution mattered more than reconciliation. Dad's voice cracked. "Can't we heal?" But I had learned healing is not group therapy when only one wound was inflicted. Yet I didn't walk out. I gave Jonah my phone number, not as a bridge but as a boundary. "You can update me on the repayment schedule. Nothing else." Dad wept. Jonah nodded, shame rippling across his jawline. Driving back through the Blue Ridge, Emmett asked if I regretted opening that door even a fraction. I traced circles on the window fog. "Doors aren't the problem," I said. "It's whether you let them slam or swing." I'd chosen a latch, firm, controlled, mine to open or close. On my next birthday I tuned the radio to a jazz station instead. At 2:07 a.m. I danced barefoot in the kitchen while cinnamon bread baked, the smell a memory reclaimed. Jonah's show was airing somewhere, but his words couldn't trespass unless I invited them. I'd built a life loud enough to drown a ghost. The courthouse mailed me the judgment in a plain envelope, no louder than a utility bill. Jonah accepted a plea, 18 months probation, full restitution, mandatory counseling. The number I gave him became a ledger. Each month he texted a screenshot of the wire transfer, followed by a single checkmark emoji. I never replied, but I saved the receipts in a folder labeled Evidence of Gravity. Debts, like planets, keep their pull even after apologies. Dad sold the Asheville house in the spring. The clapboard siding faded to the color of unspoken regrets. He moved into a condo near the river and, to my surprise, began volunteering at a hospice center, the same ward where Mom once battled chemo. When he phoned, our conversations were cautious but softening, as though we were sanding splinters instead of sawing fresh wood. We spoke at last about grief's treachery, how mourning one person can blind you to the living. He never defended Jonah's choices, but he admitted his own failure, the night he locked the liquor cabinet against me instead of the lies. Forgiveness, I discovered, is not a single verdict but a series of micropardons delivered to yourself first. Dr. Hazelwood likened it to gardening an inherited plot. You don't approve of the weeds, but pulling them is still your responsibility if you want anything else to grow. Some mornings I rose before dawn to sit on the fire escape and breathe through old panic as if exhaling dandelion seeds, release without expectation of where they land. Emmett and I married in a bookstore that smelled of ink and rain-wet coats. During the vows I tucked Mom's rosary inside my bouquet, a secret weight reminding me that lineage can wound yet still tether you to wonder. When the officiant invited anyone who objects, the silence felt earned, not hollow, as if the universe itself agreed to mind its own business. Our first dance was to a saxophone rendition of the song Jonah once dedicated. I chose it deliberately, reclaiming melody from memory like pulling a flag from occupied ground. On the anniversary of Mom's passing, I returned to her grave alone. I read aloud a letter I'd written but never sent, describing the years she missed. The shelter cots, the commas saved, the man who kept chamomile warm. I told her I had not become the thief the town believed, but I had stolen back my narrative, and that felt like justice enough. Wind rifled the pages as though she were turning them herself. Do I forgive my brother? Some days, yes. On the days I remember the boy who taught me to skip stones. Other days the scar tissue itches and I grant myself the grace to be unfinished. Healing, I've learned, isn't a ribbon cutting. It's a recurring renovation, drywall dust and all. Jonah's final repayment is still years away. Maybe my final pardon is too. That's all right. Timelines can coexist with mercy. Last month, on my 33rd birthday, the radio at 2:07 a.m. played nothing but static. The station had changed formats, or perhaps Jonah finally surrendered the microphone. I listened for a minute, smiled at the hush, then switched off the set and opened the window. The city breathed its nocturnal chorus. Distant traffic, someone whistling on a balcony, the low hum of a world busy with stories not about me. For the first time since Mom's funeral, I felt the sound of my own life louder than any ghost. If betrayal is a prison, then rebuilding is the jailbreak, but closure, that's the walk past the outer gates into air that doesn't taste of iron. I stepped back from the sill, kissed Emmett's sleeping forehead, and tucked myself beneath covers that smelled faintly of cinnamon. I'm not defined by the lies that once carried my name across radio waves. I'm defined by the fact I finally turned the dial.
If you made it this far, you're officially part of the drama. Subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done?